Hunters of Reddit, what did you see out there that made you not want to go back into the woods? My father and I were following a trail for a while, so we decided to take a break and catch our breaths. I sat on a log off the trail and my dad stood on the edge of the trail waiting for me to get up. I hear some movement and scan around, and I see a man, dressed casually, walking quickly down the trail with a Glock in his hand. He is not really following the trail. He is just walking toward my dad with haste. Before he comes up to my dad, he asks if he's seen anything. Pretty normal. I keep an eye on him because I don't believe he was there to hunt. I think he was there to make sure my dad hadn't seen anything he wasn't supposed to. He wasn't dressed like a hunter. He didn't walk like a hunter. And it was deer season and he decided he would take his Glock out to get a deer. I wasn't buying. So I put a round in the chamber and watched them talk. He seemed to be confident until my dad mentioned that he was here with me and gestured in my direction. I nodded and made a half-assed wave, and he seemed to lose interest in us and ended the conversation shortly after and turned around and walked back the way he came, just about as fast as he walked up to us. It worried us a bit, but we continued on. We haven't been back to that area in a while. My dad told me that there have been drug busts near that area in the past. This isn't a supernatural tale, just an experience that made me not want to go back to that area. A long time ago my grandparents bought a small cabin in the woods in Pennsylvania. My dad, uncle, and aunt are all small children. My father told me this story. They're all sitting around outside with a small fire going when they hear branches breaking and footsteps coming from the darkness. They think it's a black bear because it's close, but they can't see it. It seems to be going straight for my uncle, the littlest of the children. He starts panicking while everyone tells him not to move. Now this big black beast is within arm's reach of him and he's shaking like a leaf with his eyes closed. All of a sudden it opens its jaws and starts licking his face. Turns out that the next property over is owned by a couple who raise Newfoundland dogs and one got out. My family owns a couple hundred acres of forest in eastern NC. No one lives on the property anymore and hasn't for the last 6 or 7 years. We went down there to do some target shooting in October of 2017 and I decided to go walk through the outskirts of the woods to locate a good limb for our range marker. As I'm walking, literally and proverbially kicking rocks, I come across a fairly nice but practically brand new looking suitcase full of clothes and other personal effects. No ID, nothing with any sort of identifying markers on them, but seemed to be clothes for 4 people, 2 kids and 2 adults, 1 male and 1 female. Had some food, coloring books, etc. There was a makeshift lean-to about 100 yards farther into the woods. Set up a trail camera and left it there for 3 weeks. Never saw anyone. For reference, this is 35 miles from any sizable town or city. I've got one good one. I have a hunting spot that I frequent. Not crazy far off the grid or anything like that. Terrain is a pain in the ass, but it's a pretty hidden spot that is close to my house. Anyway, I hunt a lot of small game there and see a ton of mule deer anytime I go out. One morning I get there about 5:30 am and have some time to kill before I start my hiking. I have an odd feeling in the parking lot, but just chalk it up to too much coffee on an empty stomach giving me anxiety. So, I decide to start hiking in, and about 300 yards into my hike I notice this pile of downed trees / branches / general debris that I hadn't seen before. It was my first time hunting this particular place this particular season, so I figure some folks came out and did some fire mitigation work. I don't pay too much attention to it until I notice there's an odd amount of movement coming from it. Pretty small movements, but it sticks out when a brush pile is wiggling on a still day. It was also about 5:45 am, and the wilderness just sort of has this stillness to it at that time that any movement is noticeable. So, I stop and start examining the pile to figure out what's going on. I figure there's a rabbit in there, maybe some squirrels. I figure I've hit the jackpot and I'm definitely about to bag something. I start deciding the best way to flush whatever is going on in there and still have my shotgun up in time to take a good shot. I realize I'm standing by a decent sized branch and my best move is to just stomp on the branch. If all goes according to plan, everything will freeze. Then whatever is in there will dart out. I try to figure out where the rabbit will come out of. Get ready. And bam, I stomp on the branch and snap it in half. The pile goes still. And that stillness and quiet is back. Then, a mountain lion, with a bloody nose and mouth, pops up out of the pile. At this point, I'm about 10 yards from the pile. I have my shotgun, but really don't want to shoot the lion. I also don't want to fire a shot off in the air to scare it, because all in all this was a pretty cool experience that very few people get to have. It froze and was looking at me very quizzically. Then, in one quick motion it hopped out of the brush pile, ran uphill, got about 40 yards from me, and disappeared into the trees. I've never seen something cover 40 yards uphill in such a fast, graceful way. One of the cooler things I've ever gotten to experience. I went to check out the brush pile when it left, and sure enough it was feasting on a mule deer. Still my favorite out in the woods story I ever tell. When I was a kid, a poacher must have thought I was a deer or something and shot around at me. It impacted on a tree above my head. I immediately fired 3 shots as fast as I could. Not at the shooter, but in the air. In my hunting group, immediate 3 shots means help basically. My dad and our hunting club immediately came out to find out what the fuck happened by honking the horns of their trucks letting me know they were coming. I basically laid on the ground until I could tell they were near the dirt road. Told them what happened and guessed it was probably a road poacher trying to get a deer as it came from the same road. They didn't see him. It was private property and we were always very aware of who was at what location and who was hunting where. Nobody was supposed to be in the part one was at. Scared the shit out of me. This was mid-90s. Reason why I don't like hunting on public property is cause of that. And I don't know the people out there. Not a hunter, but I go backpacking and fishing quite a bit. I have an irrational fear of bears. And waking up to bear tracks around my camp was quite unsettling. And I did not spend much more time in the area. I've also had a creepy encounter with an overly friendly deer. I was in a pretty isolated area, so I thought it was odd to see a deer that was so calm around humans. This deer would not leave me alone. It walked around my camp all day and came back at night to scare the shit out of me by laying down outside my tent. Copperheads. Bow season in Kai starts early enough that you can run into a ton of them. I learned my lesson years ago to wait until at least mid-November before venturing out too deep. I had a similar experience with water moccasins in central Florida. Had to basically call it a day after coming across a dozen or so within just a few hundred yards or so. When I went hunting with my dad one time we saw a homeless looking guy carrying what looked like a torn cloth and a screwdriver on one of the trail cams. This cam was pretty deep into the woods, and it was no one we knew, so we were pretty creeped out to go back out there. I don't like to jump to conclusions, but that man was obviously going to tie someone up and stab him. Hopefully he was just doing some man vs wild type of hunting. I was being watched on the woods. It was the strangest feeling. I got paranoid enough that I began walking all the way to where I knew a park warden was parked. After about 100 meters, I turn around to make sure I wasn't being followed, and I see 3 bears smacking my stuff around. One bear was standing up in the middle of the access road staring right at me. Bears are terrifying. They are largely manageable with precaution, but they are uncanny. They are patient. They'll just watch and follow. One time I was eating in a campground off a trail I was backpacking, and I was warned there were bears around. I took appropriate precautions, but it was dark as pitch out. Soon enough, a park manager rolls up and tells me he scared off a bear nearby. What was it doing? Watching me, sitting there, behind 3 trees, just staring at my food. Who knows what would have happened if the man hadn't warned me to take extra precautions. I couldn't sleep well that night. I know I bear bagged properly, but I also know some very habituated bears can follow the scent on clothes. They're also so smart, like, you can't trap the same bear twice the same way, because they'll outsmart the same trap the second time. I think you can guess that I don't like bears. I'm just thankful that all my local bears are black, and I can scare off with loud sounds. Bear is black. Fight back. Bear is brown. Lay down. Bear is white. Good night. One of the things I remember from Boy Scouts lol. Not a hunter, but a fly fisherman who spends every weekend out hiking remote rivers and streams in search of brown trout. I live in Montreal. My normal routine is to drive down to a river that starts in upstate New York, fish a couple kilometers of the river where no one really lives or goes, then head across the border and head back down to the river on the Canadian side. So I'm out there on morning by myself. I had been out there over 100 times, so it wasn't new territory by any means. That said, I was getting close to the area where other anglers had warned me about angry landowners and threats from dudes with shotguns, so I was pretty alert. I come down to the section of river there it kinda splits around a little island, 50x 100 foot kinda island, before it reconnects and the Who River veers off to the left. Most days I stay left of the island. There are few holes. This day I went right, so my view up the river was obscured until I came around the corner of the island. I get to the point, look up, and about 250 feet in front of me, I'm standing there looking at a beige golden animal that's crossing the river. First thought, someone's dog. HMM. No homes. Too remote of an area. I'm standing there looking at this thing crossing the river, and the things are just racing through my head because what I'm looking at doesn't make sense for where I'm standing. This thing still hasn't seen me. It's just gingerly making its way through about 1-2 feet of water trying to cross across at a determined walk. That's when I notice the tail. I know a lot of dogs, but I've never seen a tail like. Hair on the back of my neck goes up. Fucking shit. I'm looking at a mountain lion in upstate New York about a kilometer from the Canadian border. I take a step back behind the tree. I stood there for another few seconds watching this thing cross. When it got to the other side it bound up a washout bank up about 20 feet in a couple bounds. There was no doubt about what I saw. I decide I've gone far enough for the day. Start making my way back to the truck which, with the way the river bends, is pretty much in the same direction that cat was headed. Ah fuck me. Get back in the truck, make my way home, and contact New York Fish and Game. I provided some data. They say sure we'll look into it. Most buddies who I fish with out there think I'm nuts, obviously. Camping alone in the middle of Missouri the night before turkey hunting. The place I found was a fairly well used campsite but no one was there. About to go to sleep when I hear a truck come up. I find a reason to come out, use the restroom, so I can get a look and maybe even ask for some good places to spot turkey. It's a dude and his girlfriend drinking beers and going for a ride. They are super nice, but they mentioned after our chat and before leaving, watch yourself out here. Lots of meth heads and they won't stop for birdshot. Want a slug? I probably have a few in my toolkit. I did not sleep at all that night. As soon as your story started I thought it was going to be meth heads as I live in Missouri myself. Pleasantly surprised that meth was still involved somewhat, so I wasn't completely wrong. Went on a camping trip maybe 10 years ago, and in the middle of the night we heard this incredibly loud smack way out on the water. Water carries sound really well, so it woke us all right the fuck up. My first though was some drunk/deranged motherfucker with a gun was shooting out over the lake and the sound was a bullet skimming off the surface. Turns out it was a beaver that smacked the shit out of the water before diving under. It happened again in the early morning and we laughed it off. But the notion of being out in the middle of nowhere with some homicidal prick taking potshots at you creeped me out pretty good. I didn't see it, but hearing my dad say, once we were safely in the car, a wild dog was stalking us that whole time made me more than a little uncomfortable. The wild dog probably hoped to eat scraps off your kill. They aren't really a match for a grown man, and for the most part they know it, until they are hungry and outnumber you. Then they get ambitious. Didn't happen while hunting, but when I was 12 I was looking for bottles in a creek on a dense forested hillside. Hear heavy footsteps behind me. They're slow and sound heavier than a human or even a buck. I almost get paralyzed when I turn around and see 2 holes on a rough leathery bump. A few seconds and a heart attack later, I realized it was just the neighbor's cow that got out, and its nose was a few inches from my face. Not a hunter. But here is my story. I used to be a field appraiser, you might call it assessor where you live, for a county in rural KS. I was at a parcel looking at in data collection some 20-foot shipping containers that had appeared in the last several months. It was obvious they were being used as hunting cabins during hunting season. As I was finishing up, I turned around to walk back to my vehicle, and standing right there were two hunters. They were dressed head to toe like snipers with ghillie suits on with large caliber rifles pointed at me. That scared the heck out of me. Of course they were mouthy and pissed off towards me. Then when they found out what I was doing, that escalated things even more. I don't blame them. Really. They saw me walking around looking and measuring everything and taking photos of the place. My brother-in-law is a county appraiser. He has some dicey run-ins with swamp dwelling rednecks. He had one attack him in his car and he was packing. Put a laser in the guy's eye and the guy screamed and fell down saying, "Don't shoot me, Dumbus." I spend a lot of time in the backcountry in the wintertime. Usually it's just me and a friend. Most trails we do are popular in the summer and totally dead once it starts to snow. Winter in 2014. We've hiked about 2 miles in and see this small black backpack in the middle of the trail. We hadn't seen any other cars at the trailhead or any people around. But this backpack hadn't been there long because there wasn't any snow on it. It had snowed the night before. It was a very odd sight. We figured if it was still on the trail when we looped around we'd pick it up. About 4 miles in, and my friend and I are chatting away when I notice a large figure flailing in some trees up ahead. We go quiet and can hear this man rambling while he's pacing. At this point we are pretty freaked out and decide to turn around when we hear, "Oh, hi there," and this guy starts walking towards us. And then out pops another guy with a very pricey looking video camera. It turned out this flailing guy was actually a rapper and they were filming a music video for one of his new songs out in the forest. They had parked before the trailhead, so we didn't notice their car. They ended up being super friendly and gave us a card, and we figured out it was their backpack we had seen on the trail a few miles before. We said our goodbyes and walked out, but hot damn, I was sure we were about to be killed in the woods. There is an illegal trail on Oahu, of many actually, but there is one story about a kid who was visiting family or something and hiked this ridge. He was posting to social media while he hiked and he went missing. During the search someone found out you could see a man following him in the background of his selfies while he was hiking. Mokpua. I remember seeing it on local news. Fucking creepy. Thought about hunting. Went out on a trip with my dad once way back. Middle of the trip, here comes a huge bear strolling right in front of our tree stands. Yeah, I'm not a hunter any longer. Was a lustrous 4-hour career though. Bears are so much bigger in person than you could ever imagine. I've been lucky enough only to see them from the safety of my car, as they tend to use back roads as paths for traveling, and even then I feel intimidated. In Illinois there aren't many predators, but the scream of a bobcat nearly made me shit my pants. I missed this trip with my dad and his hunting buddy. They were in a remote section of southeastern Wyoming hunting for elk. Like any good elk hunter, they were up at 3:30 to stake out their spot and watch the herd patterns before daylight. As they were driving up to the spot, a figure appeared in their headlights, and by their silhouette, it wasn't a hunter. What was a person doing walking down the road in complete darkness with no hunting gear? My dad was driving, so he slowed to a crawl in his truck, and his buddy prepared his sidearm, as this had foul play written all over it. When they could distinguish the figure in the headlights, they saw it was a girl in a tank top and underwear, wearing no shoes on. They stopped and verbally checked her status out the window, as there could have easily been somebody staked out in the sagebrush, ready to ambush. When it was clear she was severely hypothermic and bleeding from her feet, they got out and let her in the truck cab. From there, it had to have been a terrifying experience for that girl. I sure wouldn't want two middle-aged rednecks picking me up 40 miles from any town. They cranked up the heat full blast and drove her to a nearby country gas station, where they were regular customers and friends with the owner and his wife, who was a retired nurse. When the girl could finally articulate her words, she told them that she and her boyfriend drove out there to drink and have sex. When she started having a seizure during sex, he lost his temper, grabbed her shoes, and threw them into the sage. When she got out of the car to find them, he peeled off, leaving her in near freezing temperatures in her skivvies. She estimated she walked about 4 miles on a dirt road before my dad found her. It's a good thing hunters start early because she easily could have died. My dad's story, not mine. I had been walking for a couple hours and I decided to sit under a tree for a while. Just see what would happen. As I was relaxing, I noticed this light that kept flashing past my eyes. I looked over to where it was coming from, but I couldn't see what was there. Then I looked down and there was a red dot on my chest. Some asshole was using a laser sight and aiming at me. I yelled at him and started walking towards him, but he ran off. I went back to camp for the rest of the day. He didn't think someone was actually trying to shoot him, but if people aren't going to be safe with their rifles, he didn't want to be out there. Not a hunter, but a herper. I was looking for amphibians and reptiles with a few classmates at a local park during a herpetology class last summer, when we came across 2 little wooden teepees and a card table covered in animal bones. It looked like we walked right into the Blair Witch Project. Each of the structures had little altars that contained more bones in jars, plants, and other weird little trinkets. We got out of there fast and told the volunteer coordinator we were working with. We found out a while later that apparently some homeschooled kids nearby liked to play in the woods, and they had most likely collected the things we saw. I understand making forts in the woods, but the structures these kids made were freaky AF. Couple of years ago I was in northern British Columbia on a fishing trip with my dad, uncle and cousins. The lake and river was a 2-hour drive from the nearest city. We were drifting down the river when I needed to go to the bathroom. So I got out of the boat. As I'm doing my business, I look over and see what seems to be the top of a building. I turned to the people in the boat and told them what I saw, walked towards the building, and realized it wasn't alone. Multiple homes, buildings in the middle of the forest. It was a very small and isolated Native American tribe, and we backed away. Not super creepy, but didn't want to cause any trouble. We continued on without any contact. Haven't you watched Apocalypse Now? Never get off the fucking boat. My dad's childhood friend was killed in a hunting accident. He was shot right out of his tree stand on state land. This was back in the late 1980s. When I was young, nobody ever turned themselves in, and I doubt from the angle/caliber that they ever even found the bullet. To this day, his murder is unsolved. After that, my mom forbade my dad to go hunting, and by extension, me. I hear too many stories of people getting pissed drunk and doing stupid things with guns in the woods anyway. I'm lucky enough now to own 10 acres of property where I can take a deer just about every year with a shotgun. But I don't think I will ever hunt on state land.